The girl says to the wheelchair-bound CEO, "I can heal you." He laughs, but then the street girl makes the impossible happen. The first snow of January fell heavy over Manhattan, muffling the usual cacophony of horns and sirens into something almost peaceful. From the 28th floor of his penthouse overlooking Central Park, David Corman watched the white blanket spread across the city and felt nothing. He had perfected the art of numbness over 7 years. 7 years since the accident on I-95, 7 years since his younger brother Nathan died in the passenger seat while David walked away with a shattered spine and a guilt that would never heal. His Cadera de Rodas, a custom German motorized wheelchair that cost more than most people's annual salary, hummed softly as he maneuvered closer to the floor-to-ceiling windows. $3 billion in net worth, a company that revolutionized artificial intelligence, covers of Forbes, Wired, Time. None of it meant anything when he couldn't stand at his own brother's grave without assistance, couldn't climb the stairs of his childhood home in Vermont, couldn't feel his legs when he woke up screaming from nightmares where Nathan's blood was still warm on his hands. Grace Holloway had been living in his apartment for 3 weeks now, and David still didn't understand why he'd let her in. She was 12 years old, rail-thin, with tangled brown hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for someone who should still believe in fairy tales. She'd appeared outside his office building on 6th Avenue in mid-December, barefoot despite the freezing temperatures, wearing a jacket 3 sizes too big and carrying nothing but a backpack with a broken zipper. Security kicked her out repeatedly, but she kept coming back with a persistence that bordered on supernatural. "I can heal you," she'd said that morning when David emerged earlier than usual, fresh from firing 2 vice presidents and screaming at his board of directors because rage was easier than grief. He'd laughed, a bitter, broken sound that scared even himself. But something in her voice made him stop. Not hope. He'd murdered hope years ago. It was something else. Certainty. The kind of absolute conviction that couldn't be faked or bought. "Why should I believe you?" he'd asked, prepared to destroy her with sarcasm. Grace hadn't flinched. "Because you've tried everything except trusting someone who doesn't want anything from you." That night, she slept in his guest bedroom, a space that had remained empty since his ex-fiancée, Jennifer, packed her bags and left with a tearful speech about not being strong enough for this and needing to live her own life. The next morning, David found Grace in his kitchen making scrambled eggs with the confidence of someone who'd cooked in far worse conditions. She didn't ask permission. She didn't apologize for existing. She simply was. "Tell me about Nathan," she said 3 days later, sitting cross-legged on the Persian rug in his living room, while David pretended to read emails on his tablet. "No." "Tell me about the accident." "Absolutely not." "Tell me about what you wanted to be before all this happened." David's hands tightened on the armrests. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Grace looked at him with those impossibly old eyes. "Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything and have to decide if you're going to die with it?" That's when he started talking. It came out in fragments at first. Reluctant admissions about Nathan's laugh, about their plan to hike the Appalachian Trail together, about the way his little brother used to steal his baseball caps and wear them backwards. Then it poured out in torrents. The guilt, the survivor's shame, the way everyone at the funeral looked at him like he was already a ghost. How Jennifer left because she couldn't handle his anger, his depression, his refusal to accept that this was his life now. How his father said he was wallowing in self-pity and hadn't spoken to him in 4 years. How every medical miracle turned out to be an expensive lie. Grace listened. She didn't offer platitudes or false hope. She just listened with an attention so complete it felt like being seen for the first time in 7 years. "You don't need your legs to live," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "But you need to believe you still deserve to." David wanted to rage at her, to throw her out, to prove her wrong. Instead, he felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd been keeping sealed with anger and money and isolation. "What happened to you?" he asked. "Where's your family?" Grace's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Dead. Car accident, too, 3 years ago in Nebraska. I was in foster care for a while, but—" she shrugged. "I left." "Jesus Christ, you're 12 years old. You can't just—" "You were 42 when you decided to stop living. Age doesn't matter when you're drowning." The silence that followed was enormous. Over the next 2 weeks, something shifted. Grace didn't perform miracles. She didn't lay hands on his spine or pray over his legs. Instead, she did something far more radical. She treated him like a human being rather than a tragedy. She asked him to teach her about artificial intelligence, and he found himself explaining neural networks with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt since before the accident. She convinced him to leave the penthouse, not for physical therapy or doctor's appointments, but to get coffee at the diner on Lexington Avenue where the waitress knew everyone's order and didn't stare at his wheelchair. "Mr. Corman?" Grace said one evening, interrupting his work. She was standing by the window, snow falling behind her like a stage curtain. "When did you stop using your first name?" He blinked. "What?" "Everyone calls you Mr. Corman, or Sir. When did you stop being David?" The question hit him like a physical blow. After the accident, after Jennifer left, after he decided that David Corman died on I-95 and only the CEO survived. "I'm going to call you David," Grace decided, "and you're going to start answering to it." That night, David dreamed of Nathan for the first time without waking up screaming. But Grace was unraveling too. He noticed it in small ways. The nightmares that made her cry out in her sleep, the way she flinched at loud noises, the deep sadness that settled over her when she thought no one was watching. One morning, he found her staring at a photograph she kept in her backpack, a family of 4 standing in front of a farmhouse, somewhere flat and endless. "Nebraska," she said without looking up. "My mom taught 3rd grade. My dad fixed tractors. My little sister Emma was 7. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "The truck driver fell asleep, same as yours. Everyone died except me, and I couldn't save any of them." David felt his heart stop. "Grace, I told you I could heal you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I lied. I can't fix your spine. I don't have magic powers. I don't have anything." She finally looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I just knew that if I could save someone, if I could help someone want to live again, maybe it would mean their deaths weren't completely pointless. Maybe it would mean I deserved to survive." The truth hit David with devastating clarity. Grace hadn't come to heal his body. She'd come to heal herself by healing his will to live. This 12-year-old girl, traumatized and homeless and carrying guilt that would crush most adults, had chosen him as her purpose, her reason to keep breathing. "Come here," David said, his voice rough with emotion. Grace crossed the room slowly, and for the first time, David reached out and pulled her into an embrace. She collapsed against him, sobbing with the kind of grief that children should never have to carry alone. He held her while she shook, this impossibly brave little girl who'd been trying to save everyone but herself. "You didn't fail them," he whispered, "and you didn't fail me. You gave me back something I thought was gone forever." "What?" "A reason to want tomorrow." They stayed like that for a long time, 2 broken people holding each other together in a penthouse high above a city that never stopped moving. The next morning, David made 2 phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, initiating adoption proceedings. The second was to his father in Vermont, his voice shaking as he said the words he hadn't spoken in 4 years. "I need help, and I want you back in my life." Grace stood in the doorway watching him, hope and terror warring on her face. "I can't promise I'll be good at this," David said after he hung up. "I've never been a father. I'm angry and broken, and I don't know what I'm doing." "I've never had someone fight to keep me," Grace replied, "so we'll figure it out together." David looked at this child who'd given him back his humanity, who'd reminded him that healing wasn't about walking again, but about choosing to live despite the pain. "You were right, you know. You did heal me, just not the way I expected." Grace smiled for the first time since he'd met her, a real smile that transformed her entire face. Maybe we healed each other. Outside, snow continued to fall over Manhattan. The city moved on, indifferent to miracles. But in that penthouse, 2 people who'd lost everything began the slow, painful, beautiful work of becoming a family. Not because the past stopped hurting, not because wheelchairs disappeared or dead siblings came back or car accidents could be undone, but because they chose each other. And sometimes, that's the only miracle that matters. David Corman would never walk again. But 6 months later, when he stood, metaphorically, at Grace's middle school graduation, watching her receive an award for an essay about survival and second chances, he realized he'd been given something far more valuable than his legs. He'd been given a daughter, and she'd been given a father. And in the end, that impossible thing, love that survives catastrophe, was the truest healing either of them could have asked for.